after adopting triplets, the couple didn't expect this to happen. Emily and Hanson Piers of Manhattan, New York were living the idyllic married life. After 3 years of marriage, they felt it was time to share their love with another human being by growing their family. Unfortunately for the Pierses, fate had a different plan. The Pierses were happily married for 3 years when they realized something was missing. The logical next step for them was to have a baby, but this wouldn't prove easy for Emily. Emily Piers was one of many mothers who had difficulty conceiving. The Pierses tried for 3 grueling years to get pregnant with no success. So many years of trying only to come up short would start to take its toll on Emily and Hanson. Their marriage became strained over Emily's inability to get pregnant, so they began to look into other options. Emily and Hanson decided to seek a fertility doctor to help them find ways to conceive. It was really none of their faults that they couldn't get pregnant, but seeking help was the best option, especially to keep their sanity for their marriage. The only problem for them now was the fact that there were no reputable fertility specialists in Manhattan, which required them to look elsewhere. The closest fertility doctor they could find was all the way in St. Louis, Missouri. It was a huge inconvenience, but distance was a small price to pay for the potential to have one of God's greatest gifts. In 2014, the Pierses traveled from their humble home in Manhattan all the way to the big city of St. Louis. Once they arrived in St. Louis, Emily underwent the fertility treatment prescribed by the doctor they found there. The first treatment didn't take and the Pierses were devastated. Determined to have a baby, however, they knew that they couldn't give up. Still, they looked to more options. Emily and Hanson asked their fertility doctor about the in vitro fertilization process as one option to conceive. They were told that even though they were both great candidates for in vitro fertilization, there was still only a 10% chance that they would successfully conceive. On top of the mere 10% chance they'd get pregnant, Emily would have to undergo a grueling procedure. In vitro fertilization is an incredibly invasive process. Emily would have had to have months of hormone treatments before having her eggs harvested right out of her ovaries. After the entire process, the possibility that the embryo wouldn't implant loomed over their heads. Another caveat to the in vitro fertilization process was its incredible cost. This innovative conception procedure is not cheap at all. A basic IVF cycle can cost someone anywhere from $12,000 to $15,000. For some people, it's definitely a huge risk, especially if there was a large chance it wouldn't work. On top of that, the IVF process isn't usually covered by health insurance. In the Pierses' case, they were looking at a cost in the tens of thousands of dollars if they wanted to conceive through IVF. The high cost, combined with the slim chances, gave the Pierses second thoughts. But there was still another option. Emily and Hanson next began to consider adoption. After years of not being able to conceive and being told that medical treatments would have a low success rate, the Pierses were desperate to become parents at this point. So, Emily and Hanson moved forward with the adoption process. For those who've been in this boat, it comes as no surprise that the adoption process is grueling in itself. Long before you're allowed to bring a child home, prospective parents have to go through a lengthy application process that includes vetting their personal lives and their living situations. Anyone who's been through the adoption process knows that it could take years, especially if you're looking to adopt a newborn. But Hanson and Emily Piers were still determined to become parents and would stop at nothing to achieve that. After starting the adoption process, however, Hanson and Emily were met with another set of hurdles in order to take a baby home. All they wanted was to add a bundle of joy to their loving family, but it seemed that they were having to go through a lot in order to do just that. After their adoption application was submitted and accepted, the Pierses had to have their home evaluated. The adoption agency has to ensure that you have a home fit to raise a child in. But the biggest part of the process is perhaps the interview. This might be a cause of extreme anxiety for some, but for the Pierses it was essential to keep their cool in order to remain clear-headed throughout the ordeal. The adoption agency organized interviews for the Pierces with prospective birth mothers who decided to give up their child to a loving home. One of the mothers that they had met had chosen the Pierces to raise her child. Emily and Hanson were ecstatic for sure. Finally, it seemed that their prayers have been answered and they were one step closer to raising a family. The Pierces supported the birth mother through every step of her pregnancy as they prepared for their new addition. But just as its arrival drew near, things would take a turn for the worst. After their birth mother backed out at the last minute, Emily and Hanson Pierce decided that they had to keep trying. They recontacted the adoption agency and let them know that they still very much wanted to become parents. After another round of interviews, Emily and Hanson were chosen by a new birth mother. Unfortunately, the same thing would happen again. The second potential birth mom decided to keep her baby at the last minute as well. Just when it seemed like things took 3 steps forwards, Emily and Hanson were set 4 steps back. Though Emily and Hanson stayed with their birth mother every step of the way, something happened that would come as a crushing blow to the parents-to-be. At the very last minute of her pregnancy, the birth mother changed her mind and decided to keep her baby. The Pierces, of course, had to respect this decision. But it didn't mean that they weren't absolutely devastated, especially since they have waited so long and already had gone through so much. The Pierces have shown resilience up until this point, so giving up was not an option. They decided to move on. Eventually, their prayers would make it through because good news was right around the corner. Going through everything that they had over the last several years, it would have all been in vain if they had decided to end their journey right then and there. But after the second birth mom had backed out, the Pierces received a call that would change their lives forever. The Pierces were at their lowest point after the second birth mom backed out. But suddenly, Emily Pierce received a call from the adoption agency that would give her hope. It seemed that their prayers had been answered when the adoption agency told them there was a third birth mother who had chosen the Pierces to adopt her baby. It was amazing news for sure, but this wouldn't be the end of the road for the Pierces. In fact, things were going to get a little more interesting because little did everyone know, this third birth mom had something up her sleeve. At the ultrasound appointment, Emily and Hanson would have a chance to see their new child for the first time. However, something strange showed up on the scan that displayed on the ultrasound monitor. Everything looked normal for the birth mom, but to her surprise and everyone else's, she was actually carrying 3 babies instead of 1. Emily, Hanson, and their birth mother were completely shocked to see 3 heartbeats on the ultrasound monitor. They have worked so hard for so long just to be blessed with 1 bundle of joy, but now the universe was giving them 3. At this point, the Pierces knew that this is what was in store for them all along. They weren't expecting to have to adopt 3 kids, but upon this discovery, they knew that these triplets were meant for them. Excited for what the future had in store, the Pierces expedited the adoption process and began preparing for their new additions. The Pierces were not prepared to have so many babies at once. They had spent so much time trying to get one, that's pretty much all they were prepared for. But Emily and Hanson were not ones to give up and instead were up for the challenge. To prepare for their 3 bundles of joy, the Pierces got to work immediately. They had to baby-proof their house and had to buy 3 of everything, including cribs and strollers. Getting all the necessities ready for the triplets was expensive, but certainly not as much as IVF would have been. If anything, Emily and Hanson were ready to shell out anything to prepare for the triplets' arrival. After all, their dream of becoming parents and raising a family had been a long time coming at that point. They couldn't have been more excited. In May 2013, their birth mother's water broke and she went into labor 8 weeks early. Emily and Hanson went to the hospital and anxiously waited to meet their new babies. After hours of what was probably a grueling labor, the birth mother delivered 3 tiny babies. Each baby was a mere 3 pounds. Their names were Hannah, Joel, and Elizabeth. As much as the Pierces were excited to meet their newborn triplets, they still had yet another obstacle to overcome before they could take Hannah, Joel, and Elizabeth home. This time, it wasn't because of the birth mother either. Because Hannah, Joel, and Elizabeth were born 8 weeks early, they were considered premature. This was alarming for new parents Emily and Hanson, but they had to remain positive. After all, they were happy to finally have their prayers answered. The premature triplets had to stay in the neonatal intensive care unit for a while before they were healthy enough to go home with the Pierces. At the hospital, the triplets went through rapid development, growing bigger and stronger with each day. The Pierces watched patiently from afar before they could finally start raising their family. Emily and Hanson were excited to expand their family, but something would happen that would alter the dynamic forever a few years later. 1 week after the triplets' birth, Emily began to feel sick. The lengthy adoption process and preparing for the arrival of triplets took its toll on the Pierces, so it wasn't out of the ordinary that Emily thought she should visit the doctor. After all, she wanted to make sure she was healthy by the time the babies came home to ensure that she would be well enough to take care of 3 newborns. Emily went through an extensive evaluation with her doctor to find out if she was well. When her doctor came back with the results, Emily could hardly believe it. The doctor conducted many tests to find out why Emily was feeling sick. Eventually he discovered the reason. He told Emily that she wasn't necessarily sick, but in fact, she was experiencing the symptoms of pregnancy. That's right, Emily was pregnant. This was certainly a shock to the Pierces, especially since they had just adopted triplets. Of course, it was incredible news. As stressful as it was going to be to raise 3 newborn triplets during a pregnancy, Emily was prepared for the challenge. Little did they know at that point that their blessings weren't going to end there. After years of trying to conceive and unsuccessful fertility treatments, Emily Pierce was convinced that she was barren. She and Hanson had forgotten about trying to conceive naturally when they decided to go down the adoption route. But the news of Emily's pregnancy was a welcome surprise, and it didn't end there. A few months into the pregnancy, the Pierces discovered that Emily was pregnant with twins. News that they were giving birth to more multiples was astounding, especially since they now had to grapple with the fact that they were about to raise 5 babies at once. Instead of getting stressed out over it, Emily and Hanson Pierce saw the humor in the situation and decided to roll with the punches. After all, this was an incredible blessing after years and years of trying. A few months before the triplets turned 1 year old, Emily went into labor. After a long delivery, Emily and Hanson welcomed their twins, Andrew and Abigail. Now, they were a happy family of 7 with 5 beautiful babies to raise. Life for the Pierces was finally looking up, and they were excited for what was in store with their growing family. Adjusting their family to accommodate 2 newborns was probably a smooth process since they had months of practice with their triplets. Of course, it was definitely a lifestyle adjustment for Emily and Hanson, who lived with just each other for so long. Many new parents experience a lack of sleep with just 1 newborn, so imagine how sleep-deprived the Pierces might have been with 5 of them. Thankfully, they had the loving support of their family and friends to back them up. Even the community chipped in to help the Pierces adjust to life as new parents. Manhattan's Eastland Baptist Church helped donate food to the growing family by cooking them meals and providing baby formula. Emily and Hanson were blessed to have their community come to their rescue, and food wasn't the only thing that they helped out with. There were some definite changes that had to be made in order for the Pierces to adjust to life with 5 newborns. Emily and Hanson had to shift their personal schedules to center around their babies, and they also had to invest in a bigger van. One of the biggest challenges for the Pierces, however, was being able to tell their babies apart. Emily and Hanson's trick for this was to paint each baby's toenails a different color. They used this system for quite some time until the babies began developing distinct personal features and personalities. Emily and Hanson Pierce's story is certainly one for the books. Like most things this remarkable that happens in the digital age, the Pierce's story went viral. It first gained attention on Facebook, But after their story was shared enough times, more and more people grew obsessed with this miraculous story.